Hey, all you pixels in pixel land. This is Mike Janda. I am coming at you live here with the B-Dog from the C-Dog. That's what I call Canada. That's what all the cool people are calling Canada, C-Dog.
Welcome to Two Pixels Off, a podcast for creative entrepreneurs.
Up there with the Huskies and the Canadian tundra. It's all what's happening up there, and everybody in Canada's loving it.
We can feel the cold coming. You know what they say in that Game of Thrones? Winter's coming. That's what's happening. Winter is coming.
Thrones. I was late to the Game of Thrones party, just so you know.
There you go. And, I wasn't.
Now I know. I was late to the party. I watched it all over the last couple of years. Well, actually watched it twice. It's better the second time. And I didn't hate the ending. Like everybody was hating on the ending. I thought it was good. I was good.
I liked it.
And maybe it was because everybody was hating on the ending. So I went into it thinking, oh, the ending's gonna suck. But then I actually liked it because it didn't suck as bad as what people made it out to suck like.
Yeah.
This is the Game of Thrones tangent. All right.
Yeah.
Shout out to Wix Studio for making TPO a possibility. We appreciate the platform. Super great web design, web builder with no code. And then on top of that, you have all kinds of other features that you can customize for your clients. You can manage leads, you can manage your invoicing, you can manage your e-commerce store. It's just packed with features and always coming out with new things. So check out Wix Studio at wix.com/studio, but I think also wixstudio.com does resolve to the platform. And today we're going to dig in. We're going to give you a little bit of a speedier version of the podcast today, because Brad and I know that we can get long-winded. In the last episode, we went a little over on we went to our normal time, which is longer than what our aggressive time is. So we're going to try and do a little bit shorter episode, and we're going to stay on target and on point. I'm going to give you less Canada jokes. I'm not going to give you as many B-Dog jokes. I'm not going to tell you about he's one out of the 1 in 1,000 people in the world is born with 6 fingers. Did you know this statistic? I didn't know this until my sons. But Brad is one of them. Brad is one of the 1 out of 1,000 people that is born with 12 fingers, 6 on each hand. He is embarrassed about it, but he tries to hide it. But he is one of those people.
So funny for those who are listening
as a result of it.
Yeah, for those who listen and don't watch are probably like, "Whoa, Brad sounds like what sort of stuff is going on over there?"
He's just mangled. He's just mangled.
Something in the water.
If you haven't seen him, don't do a search. Don't do a search for Brad Hussey, because you can't get those pictures out of your mind. Once you've seen them, you cannot. They will haunt you. They will haunt you in the wee hours of the night. I feel it every time we record.
Remember how you said you weren't going to dig on B-Dog? There you are. I can't help it.
I can't stop myself. Okay, what are we talking about today, Brad? We're talking about payment terms. Terms. You have, I have a story relating to this that gets me fired up, but I just did this long meandering intro. So why don't you kick us off with your initial thoughts on payment terms and charging clients? How do we get them to pay? In what cadence?
Yeah. Okay. So I got a couple hot takes on it that might be a little unorthodox in the web design creative services world. You might hear common advice from people of all positions of authority saying, you take the deposit up front and 50% up front, 50% upon completion, or various forms of that. A deposit up front, a second payment, and a final payment. Sometimes you have that 4 payments. If it's a long-term project, then you split that up into 3 or 4 of those payments. A lot of the time it's 50% up front, 50% upon completion, and some take on that. To me, I've done that before. I've definitely done that. I've done various forms of it. What I've landed on, at least for my type of work that I do, I'm a big fan of pay everything up front or I don't do it. That's my take. It's a hot take, and I know it doesn't work for everybody. Certainly it won't work for everybody, and I wouldn't even suggest that everybody just implement that. The reason I can do that is generally my service ranges from 2,500 to 10,000. And for my target market, they can pay all of that up front. They can afford to pay it all up front. They either have a business Visa or credit card that can take on the payment and they pay it off, or they can wire transfer me. They got cash in the bank. That generally has been the case. So for me, asking for it all up front is kind of like part of it. And especially because for me, my service is a 1 day or a 1 week service. I don't want to bill you 50% up front, so $1,250, and then try and chase you down for $1,250 for the next 3 weeks. Give me all of it up front or I don't do it. You signed a contract. I'm going to do the work. I'm not running away. And for the larger one, I have split like a $10,000 thing up, but I don't do it upon completion. I think upon completion is a total nightmare, and everyone should stop doing that, because upon completion is a moving target. I say, if you can't give me 10,000 up front, which is fair. Maybe you don't have that cash in the bank or the credit card limit is higher than that. Okay, give me 5,000 up front and then 5,000, in 3 days. Or let's say it's a month-long project. I'll give this one more take and then you tell me what you think. I don't do upon completion. I just say it's a weekly payment schedule. And I don't do upon completion because that's always moves. I just say, you owe me $10,000. You can get paid up front. It's $10,000. If you have to split it up because of certain limits on transactions, that's fair. But the way we'll do it is 10,000 or 5,000 right now and 5,000 next week. It doesn't matter if it's a 6-week long project. I just want it paid and done. And I tell them, I'm doing this because I love this and we got to get the business part out of the way. The more we have to drag out the money talk and I have to be your collection agent, the less that we're going to like each other. So you settle up the business part. We get this done, signed, sealed, delivered, cash, blah, blah, blah. Now Brad gets to be the superhero creative entrepreneur that you hired him for. Okay. And they're like, great. I love it. I like that policy and it's great. So that's my take on it. What do you think about that?
That's a good take. I wrote down a few hot buttons for me while you were on your monologue.
Okay.
Here is and when I say monologue, I mean it like in a good way. Like you're trying out for a show, not in like the bad guy standing up telling about his devious plan.
Like the thespian drama
interesting situation. Yeah, exactly. You're in an interesting situation because you have many streams of income. And so in some ways, your design services or your creative services, and not all design, but your creative services is a side hustle for you. You would be fine if you didn't have any done in 1 days or done in 1 weeks at all. You would be fine. Yeah. And if you say to a client, you pay it all up front or we don't work together, and they decide to not go that route, then you will still be fine. And so you're in a little bit different situation than some creatives who have to navigate it with a little more diplomacy. You also have something, Brad, that a lot of creatives don't have that bringing to the table, and that is authority in your space. You have authority to dictate the terms because you are positioned as the expert and a thought leader in the creative space. And so you can push in a way that some younger creatives that haven't built what you have cannot. Okay, so I wrote down a handful of little Mike-isms on this. And here are some rules that I have about payment terms. The first one, the bigger the project, the more invoices you send. The bigger the project, the more invoices you send. If you have a $50,000 project, you are not going to do that in 2 invoices. It is bad for you and it is bad for the client. So if you have a $500 project, you are not going to do that in 3 invoices. It is annoying to you and it is annoying to the client. So the quantity of invoices is proportional to the size of the dollar amount that the client is spending. So that's part number one. The next one, 50-50 billing sucks. It sucks. And this is taught by people. I've seen it, and I did it, man. I did this in the early days of my agency, and I got rid of it as soon as I realized how bad it sucks. And I'm going to give you the horror story of this sucking in a super bad way. And it was at the agency I sold my agency to. So this was like 2015. They had done a website for a client in 2014. And that client paid 50% up front. And then it was supposed to be 50% upon completion. It was supposed to be like a 6 or 9 month project. It was like $100,000 website project. So the client paid their $50,000 and then $50,000 at the end. So I sold my agency in August of 2015. That project, I think, was supposed to be completed in like April or March or something. It still wasn't completed. The client would not sign off on it. All the work was done, but the client would not approve to go live. When did that project finally complete? It was sometime in 2016 before it was finally live and the client approved it. And the agency could finally invoice for the balance 50% of the project. And I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe you're billing $5 million a year and you still are having this 50-50 billing crap, because it does not work in those situations. They didn't follow the rule of the bigger the project, the more invoices you have. The other rule I have is balance your invoices with the amount of work completed. So you do not want to have a project, a website project that's a 6-month long project, and you don't want to have 100% of the work done. Meanwhile, the client has only paid you 50% of the project. This is not fair to you. And it is also not fair to the client for you to charge the client $90,000 at the start when you have completed 0% of the work. That's not fair to them. And this is counter to what Brad's hot take was, but we're not talking about $2,500 engagements. We're talking about a $90,000 or $100,000 engagement, charging them 90% up front and then a small invoice at the end is not fair to them. So what I started doing at my agency was invoicing based on phases completed. And we would break our projects into 3 to 5 phases, and we would invoice 50% of phase 1 at the start. And when phase 1 was done, we would invoice the final 50% of phase 1 and the first 50% of phase 2. And when phase 2 was completed, we would invoice the final 50% of phase 2 and the first 50% of phase 3, and so on. And in a $100,000 website, this spreads the payments over the work completed, and the agency or creative continues to get cash flow. The client is not overpaying in relation to the work completed, and the agency is not over getting paid based on the amount of work that they've done. And the agency is not doing a ton of work and waiting for the client to catch up on payments. So it balances out the payment schedule. Now, I would do this sometimes in a 3 invoice manner or sometimes in a 5 invoice manner. Sometimes we had one client, it was a $500,000 website, and we probably invoiced that client 12 times over like a 6 or 8 month period. I didn't mind. They didn't mind. It was a $500,000, man. I didn't ask them for 100% up front or take a hike, because the bigger the project, the more invoices you have. So we spread it over phases and did it that way. I got screwed on breaking out invoices based on weekly or monthly timelines. So sometimes people will take a project, they have, let's say it's a $10,000 project, and they say, we're going to invoice you, and it's going to be spread over 10 weeks. And we're going to invoice you $1,000 a week for 10 weeks. That's what we're going to do. And then the project starts and you start invoicing $1,000 on week 1, $1,000 on week 2, $1,000 on week 3. And the client's just putting it on a credit card, auto paying. But meanwhile, the client paused. They paused the project and in week 3, and they won't give you feedback on your strategy or your tech strategy or whatever it is. They won't give you feedback on it because something's happening in their business, and now they pause the project, and you just keep invoicing. And then you get to week 9 and the project's still paused. You're only completed with a small portion of it, but you've collected 90% of the money. And then the client says, you know what? Actually, we can't restart this. We need to cancel this project. And now you're giving them money back. I did this, man. I gave a client $52,000 back because I was collecting it on a monthly basis. They stalled out, and then they changed scope so many times that we canceled the project, and I had to pay them $52,000 back of money I had collected. I hated it, and I never did that again. Started invoicing in phases based on that one experience alone. So don't invoice based on time, invoice based on work completed, and try and keep it balanced. The amount of work done versus the amount they've paid, amount of work done, amount they've paid. Now, what is a lot? Well, that's relative to you. How much is a big project? Well, for some people, $1,000 is a big project. Mm-hmm. And for some clients, I wouldn't go into it without them paying my $1,000 up front because they're too risky. Yeah. So you're entitled to say, you know what, pay me all of it up front or I'm not going to do this. And say it to them. Don't take that risk on for yourself. Ask them or force them to make that bigger payment. Anyway, Brad, I'm on a soapbox on some of that stuff, but what are some of your thoughts relating to that? And I have more stories to tell and more things to share, but let's go from there.
Yeah. So it makes sense that, pricing is a relative thing because it really depends on so many factors. Is it a client that can afford $10,000 and it's like a drop in the bucket, or is $10,000 like their life savings or their business's entire savings account and it's like huge risk for them? In which case, each of those are very different. And so it really depends. I liked what you said about the risk of weekly billing, because part of me really likes the sprint-based billing, where you say, our agency, we work on sprints and we bill you weekly. And our weekly rate is, let's call it $4,000. $4,000 a week. And now I can say to this project, I estimate it's going to take 6 weeks. So therefore, 4,000 times 6, you could do the math. But then you could say, if you're fast and you're tardy with your feedback and we're not dragging that out of you and you don't add to the scope, we'll get this done in maybe 5 weeks. Could be less if we're really on the ball. But if you're slow to get back to us and you push our meetings back, you don't show up for our weekly sprint stand-ups, then this could be an 8-week project. So then that billing would be, 2 extra weeks at $4,000 a week. So the client is incentivized to hurry it up and do their work. But you still give them, it's going to be 8 weeks, as our benchmark could be 10. Ideally, we get this done in 7, and that's dependent on you. So I like that model. And I know that some people have had success with that model. And I think in certain contexts that could work well. The story that you told, which did sound stressful, where you're just billing weekly and they're being auto charged on their card, but nothing's really happening, or they backtrack on something, or they don't even, I can foresee that getting into a problem where a year down the line, you've been building them $1,000 a week. Nothing really is getting done, but it's the client's fault. But they're like, hey, come on, you billed us $52,000 and nothing's really been done. We changed plans here. I need that money back. You didn't do anything for us. Unless you had it very clearly outlined in scope to be this is a subscription style. If you choose not to avail yourself of our services, that's your problem, not mine. Know that full well, right up front, signed, sealed, delivered, so that if you try to legally take me to court and say, I want my money back. And you're like, look, you signed up for this. If you buy a subscription to Netflix or your YMCA and you spend $200 a month and you don't go to the damn YMCA, you can't go, YMCA, give me my $2,000 back. I didn't use this for 12 months. You're like, so what? Your problem, man. You have unlimited access to this place and you chose to not. So I see how that can get problematic, and you might want to stay away from it if you think that your service doesn't quite work on that weekly billing or subscription style. but I could see how it also can work. So you have to use prudence in order to understand, is this the right pricing model for this service, or is this problematic and going to create stress for everybody?
Good comments. It made me think of something too that I see as a problem with creatives, that they think sometimes that every project should be invoiced the same way. Oh, I bill by the hour, or I bill by the project, or I always bill in this way, these 3 invoices. This is how I do it. And every project, it is not that way. Every single client and every single project can have different payment terms. You can have a client that, because they seem high risk, you ask them for 100% upfront. You can do that. If you have a client that you know is no risk, that they will pay, then you can just charge them all of it at the end and take the risk that you know they'll pay. It's your best friend from growing up. You know that they're going to pay. Well, sometimes those people don't pay.
Yeah, those people don't pay.
Anyway, yeah, those are the people who think that they're entitled to your free labor or something.
Yeah.
But the point is that you don't have to have the same payment terms for every single client. They can change from project to project and client to client based on the amount of risk you want to take. Now, I don't personally, I'll give you examples, Brad. If I had I did a little project. It wasn't a little project. It was, $15,000 or something that I did for someone over the summer. It was the first time I'd done, it was consulting work that kind of morphed into me doing some design work. And I did all the work for $14,000 worth of work without even invoicing them once and not even worrying about it. And it wasn't until like 2 weeks after we were kind of wrapped up that I was like, oh, hey guys, I better invoice you. But my trust level with them was so high that I knew that they were going to pay. I had no concerns. I've known the person, my main contact, for like 17 years on a close level. I knew it was going to pay. I did not worry about it, and I invoiced it. Now, for me, in my current phase of life, $14,000 is not something that I'm going to lose sleep over. I'm not going to feel scared that if this client does not pay me, then this bad thing is going to happen. I'm not in that phase of life, but I have been. I know what that phase feels like. And to a lot of freelancers listening to this, $14,000 is like make or break your freaking year. It could be all your profit for the whole year. It could be the difference between you paying your rent next month and not paying it. That's the difference. And you got outstanding bills and a contractor you owe money to. And $14,000 is a big risk. In that situation, do not do 100% of the work before you invoice the client, because you have too much need for that revenue to risk that much. In my situation, I did not. And so I was content doing that. I'm just illustrating this as it can be different from person to person and client to client and project to project. You need to establish terms that make you feel comfortable and that are fair to the client and fair to you. Mm-hmm. And if fair to you, Brad, in your current phase is 100% upfront, then that's fair. That can be just the way you do it. That's fine. You're comfortable doing it. You don't mind if the client says no. You don't mind if the client pushes back and you say, well, sorry, that's just the way I work. And then they're like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And then they pay. You don't care. Or if they say, okay, well, then I'm not going to do it. Then you don't care, because that's the phase that you're in. That's the phase that you're in. And you know the value of what you're providing to them. So for the people listening, just know that. Know that it can vary, and know that it should be dependent upon how much you're willing to risk and what feels comfortable to you.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot, because a lot of the time we'll hear things on the internet and we'll take it as gospel. Like I always like to say, take it as guideline, not gospel. They'll say, Alex Hormozy said it, and he's a multi-millionaire and wants to be a billionaire, so I should probably just do what he does, or this influencer, or this creator, or this expert in my space, or this YouTuber who's like super popular, or this one who is super successful. Like, so I'll just do it their way. thing is like, I can sit here and say, and give you a sticky take, a hot take. That's like, only take it up front, like 100% up front. That's it. Yeah. You have to do it. But I'd be doing you, the listener, a genuine disservice, because that probably will only work for 2% of you because of so many factors. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're like, Brad, my average project is $100,000. If I ask for that up front, like I'm doing the wrong thing. So that's stupid advice. Or you might be someone who's like, my project is $5,000. It's the biggest project I've ever had, and it's going to be a game changer for my business, and I need it. And if I ask for 100% upfront, they're going to say no, and I lost out on the biggest deal of my life so far and screwed myself over. Thanks a lot, Brad. So don't do that. Yeah. So it's easy for me to make a YouTube video and build a name off of only do it this way. But you got to know that comes with the disclaimer is that it really is I only do it this way. I just chopped off the I in the video so it sounds more like authoritative. I only do it this way. Why? Because I've been doing this for 12 plus years. I don't need the money from that work because I've got multiple other income streams that I've spent a lot of time building up. So I'm in a position where I can have clients say no. It's not big risk for me. If it was big risk, I wouldn't do it that way. I would do it the more by the book traditional way. Here's the project. Here's the modest but profitable fee. Here's how much I upfront. Here's the payment schedule based on, as Mike puts it, basically what's delivered in phases. The first part is basically a security to make sure that we're doing business. There's skin in the game here. The next phase is where a huge part of that creative and development happens. So that's 40% of the fee. And then after that, it's just a little tiny bit left, a little tying up a few loose ends and hitting the big green button and giving you a quick little coaching call on how to use the services I've created for you. And it's a small remainder of it, 5% of it, 2% of it, 10% of it. Yeah. That is the unsexy but totally safe standard way of doing it. I give hot takes, you give hot takes, other people give hot takes because it's interesting to listen to, but you have to know as the listener, that works for that person in that scenario, and your mileage may vary and may not at all work, which is why it's good to fall back to the standard, unsexy, but real advice, like do it in phases and, or change up your pricing. Maybe you're always the subscription guy, but be okay with doing a fixed price. Be okay with doing an hourly project. Yeah. Be okay with doing a custom price. Be okay with this. That's how it works. It's the unsexy, realistic version of it.
Business is a toolbox. That's the way that I look at all of this stuff. And so the toolbox is one of the things in your payment terms toolbox is 100% upfront, Brad's model. Yeah. And maybe that works for some of you in some instances. Another tool in that box is phased billing, which is what I did for most of the work at my agency. Another tool is hourly billing, and you invoice them on a weekly basis. You could do hourly billing and invoice them on a monthly basis. You could do a retainer billing and invoice them at the start of every month for the retainer of the month that comes. You could do a retainer where the client pays the retainer at the end of the month after you've done all the work, if you're comfortable doing that. That's another model. You can do 50-50 billing if you really love it. And in some cases, a $500 logo. Maybe in your situation, you do want to charge the client $250 at the start, and you're willing to risk the back end $250 on the logo if the client bails or hates it or fires you or whatever, and you don't get that $250. You're willing to risk that much, then do your 50-50 billing. I'm not saying that you never ever do it. I'm saying that I would probably never do it, but I'm not saying it shouldn't be in your potential toolbox of things. So put them in your toolbox and use the right one for the scenario, situation, client, and project that you're in. I do have another rule. I have two more rules that I'll share on this. The first one is save the biggest invoice for last. And going back to the example of that $100,000 website, guess how we started charging for six-figure websites in the future? After that, It was like, we're never doing that again. And I started putting in the payment terms in our contracts and fixed this problem. And the last invoice on a $100,000 website was probably like $5,000. We would have billed $95,000 of it. And if they never approved it to go live, we were out $5,000 of the $100,000. I'm willing to take that 5% risk. And in that situation, I don't care. I'm like, okay, fine, sit on this for the next 8 years. I mean, I kind of want to get it out of our agency, but if you don't want to approve it and never want to use what you spent $95,000 on and just want to let it sit there because you won't make it go live, then do that. I don't care, because I didn't need the $5,000. It wasn't going to make or break the agency that we had that was doing $7 million a year. So it didn't, that amount didn't matter. So the smallest invoice last. Don't be afraid to do 50, 40, 10. Like you got a $1,000 project and you could do 500 at the start, 400 after some kind of phase is completed, and then $100 at the end after delivery. They'll owe you the last $100. You can do stuff like that. It can be in your business toolbox. Okay, and then the very, very last thing that I have here, Brad, is that you are the seller of the thing. And so you dictate the terms. Take this, for example, we could go on any other thing. You go and buy a car, and the car dealer says, okay, that car is going to be $24,000. And you go to them and you say, okay, I'm going to pay that out of 24 payments. I'll give you 24 payments and we'll spread them over the next 4 years. That's my terms. What would the dealer say to you? They would say, no way, Jose. We're not doing that. That's not how it goes. I'm the one selling you the car. These are the payment terms. You'll pay monthly for X amount of time with this amount of interest, and take it or leave it. That's what happens when you're buying a car. On the flip side, you go to a nice fancy restaurant and they're not charging you 50% up front before you go and have your $300 meal with your wife or spouse. They're not going to charge you 50% up front. They're going to take all the risk that your credit card's going to clear, that you're actually going to pay. You're not going to dine and ditch and whatever. They take all the risk and you pay it at the end. They're taking all the risk. So it differs. It differs because the seller is the one dictating the terms, and you, as the seller of creative services, should dictate the terms to your client. You tell the client that you want to do it 50, 40, 10, and those are your payment terms. You tell them you're going to invoice it based on phases, and that's the payment terms. And if they push back on you, don't be afraid to push back and say, no, I'm sorry, that's our policy.
Yeah.
We would love to work with you, but that's our policy. And you have to be willing to kind of stand your ground and realize that you can't let a client steamroll you and bully you into payment terms that are not mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
That's what you're looking for. And 50-50 is not mutually beneficial. They're investing too much at the start and you're investing too much at the end. It is not balanced in most cases. What are your thoughts on some of those last hot takes from me?
Yeah, I like it. If there's one thing that you can take away that is just the truth, is that 50-50 billing does not work always. Especially if it's 50-50 billing, specifically 50% upfront. This is the mistake. 50% upon completion. Never use that. That sort of 50-50 billing is always a mistake. Because, well, 50% upfront, especially if it's a mid to large project, that's a lot for them to hand over right away. And 50% to get back out of it upon completion, we've all been, or anyone with some experience in this has been in a scenario where it never gets complete. What does that mean? So don't do that. If you're going to do 50-50, do it where you do your 50% up front and your 50% on a date. And if that date is close to what your projected end date is, that's fine. but don't do it upon completion. Do it on a fixed time. Let's say it's a $5,000 project, so it's not giant, but it's $5,000. You owe me $2,500 to start. Okay. And you owe me $2,500 on October 1st because we anticipate the project will ship on November 1st. If the project ships on January 1st of the next year, I still got my 100% out of it. You just delayed it. But do it on a fixed date. So if you could take anything from it, your 50-50 upfront and upon completion is a mistake. The rest of this episode was our sandwich that gave you all the meat and all the condiments, explaining how to properly approach pricing from the various different angles, because it's a very nuanced. It's not one size fits all, except for the end cap of 50% upfront, 50% upon completion is a mistake. Don't do that.
Okay. I agree with it's a mistake, but I would say because so many people teach it, you can put it in your toolbox, but let it be that extra set of pliers that you actually never use, but for some reason you carry it around with you everywhere.
Fair.
That's what I would make 50-50 billing.
If you're going to do that and you literally say upon completion, for goodness sake, define completion in the contract so that when you try and get
define
your completed money from them, you can invoke that and say, look, it is complete. So I need that final 50%. And we can do the last tied up loose ends that you've mentioned here. But in the contract, on paper, it all reconciles. It's complete. Please pay the $2,500 or we will halt further development or whatever it is.
I had an idea, Brad, when you were talking. Make your 50-50 billing based on when the designer determines or the creative determines that it is complete, not based on when the client approves it for completion. So you say to the client, if you want to do 50-50, if you're sitting here listening to this and saying, I got it, I don't want to change that, I'm doing that. And you're like, Mike's stupid and Brad's ugly and you don't want to listen to us, that's fine. Do your 50-50, but make it big, make that final payment based on 50% when the creative service provider decides or determines that the project is complete. It does not mean when the client provides final approval. Sign off. So that could be a way that you could potentially do your 50-50 if you're so freaking in love with it because Joe Doe, whoever said that that's the way to do it. And you're like, that's the way I'm doing it. And you're stuck in that. Hopefully we've convinced you not to do it that way. I've given other content out about 50-50 billing sucks. I think I have a YouTube video called 50-50 billing sucks, where I go on probably a similar rant to what I had here. I just hate it. I've gotten screwed on it. I hate that. I hate it. Anyway.
Yeah. Well,
I think one of the takeaways that I would want people to have.
Hopefully we've helped people avoid the mistake and point people in the right direction to avoid some heartache. But I think we've said all we can say on that specific subject.
Yeah. Remember, you're the seller. You dictate the terms. You're the seller. You dictate the terms. And remember that all of these ideas are things in your toolbox that you can do. But do not get into a situation where you feel uncomfortable about the payment schedule and you feel like it is lopsided in the client's favor because they're trying to steamroll you into something that's beneficial for them and not beneficial for you. So be careful with that and don't be afraid to push back. You know what happens when people push back? You push back and you say, sorry, that's my policy. That's the way that we invoice for these things. And then they're like, oh, dang it. Well, let me go talk to my boss. And then they come back and they're like, okay, that's fine. Let's get started. And they give you the first invoice because you just stood your ground. You do not need to flop when, like a Canadian soccer player, you do not need to flop like a Canadian soccer player when, I don't know, do you guys even play soccer up there?
We do, Brad? And I don't think we're the floppers. Anyway, I think When I watch soccer, I'm like, come on, guys, you're more tough than that. What are you crying about? Wobbling around on the field because you blew wind at me. I think it's silly.
It's so funny. The flops, the flop videos. Oh man.
Yeah. Canadians play hockey.
You do not need to flop
and they
when the
beat
client
each other up.
pushes
So
on you.
that I don't think many Canadians do the flop, I'll say.
That's right. There's no flopping in hockey. There's no flopping in hockey.
Yeah.
That would not fly. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening to this episode of 2 Pixels Off about payment terms. It was fun chatting about this. Thanks, Brad, for this conversation. It was super fun. And we hope all of you Pixels have a great week. And we'll be back next week with another episode. And shout out to Wix Studio. Go check out wixstudio.com for web design, no code platform that is super powerful and robust and has a lot of tools. And you can set up your invoices right in there and invoice your client for the work that you're doing for them. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time on 2 Pixels Off.